The cruelest betrayals never arrive on a battlefield. They happen while everyone is applauding. Olivia Bennett stood beneath the glowing moon altar with her hands folded tightly around a bouquet of white winter roses, believing every heartbeat carried her one step closer to the future she had dreamed about since childhood. Snow drifted gently through the open ceiling of the ceremonial hall, melting into silver light as it touched the sacred marble floor. Hundreds of guests from neighboring alpha packs filled the grand chamber, their elegant gowns and tailored suits shimmering beneath crystal chandeliers carved from ancient ice. At the far end of the aisle stood Alpha Ethan Walker, tall, confident, and admired by nearly everyone present. He had been Olivia's promised mate for 3 years. Together they had attended festivals, honored pack traditions, and spoken countless times about the family they hoped to build. Although Olivia came from the once respected Bennett family whose influence had faded over the years, Ethan had always insisted that none of it mattered. She believed him. As the moon priest lifted the ceremonial ring toward the winter sky, a peaceful silence settled across the hall. Olivia looked into Ethan's familiar blue eyes, waiting for the moment he would finally place the ring on her finger. Instead, he took a slow step backward. The movement was so unexpected that several guests exchanged confused glances. Olivia smiled nervously, assuming he had forgotten part of the ceremony. Then Ethan spoke. "Before this bond is completed, there is something everyone deserves to know." His calm voice echoed across the hall with unsettling confidence. Olivia felt a chill far colder than the winter air. Ethan turned away from her and faced the assembled guests. "I cannot complete this ceremony." Soft whispers immediately spread through the audience. The moon priest lowered his hands in confusion. Olivia stared at Ethan, unable to understand what she had just heard. "Ethan?" she asked quietly. He finally looked back at her, but the warmth she had always known had disappeared from his expression. "Olivia, you are kind, loyal, and deserving of respect. But kindness alone cannot strengthen a bloodline." Every word struck harder than the last. She searched his face for some sign that this was a misunderstanding, yet none appeared. Ethan continued without hesitation. "Our pack deserves a future built upon pure lineage. I have chosen Sophia Lancaster." At that very moment, a graceful young woman dressed in an elegant silver gown stepped forward from the front row. Her long golden hair shimmered beneath the chandeliers as she approached Ethan with complete confidence. The crowd immediately recognized the Lancaster crest embroidered upon her sleeve, one of the oldest pureblood families in the kingdom. Murmurs grew louder. Some guests looked shocked. Others quietly nodded as though they had expected this announcement all along. Olivia remained perfectly still. It felt as though the sound inside the hall had drifted far away, leaving only the pounding of her own heartbeat. Ethan walked toward her and gently reached for the engagement ring resting in her trembling hand. She did not resist. She simply watched as the symbol of every promise they had ever shared disappeared from her finger. The silence surrounding her somehow felt louder than the applause that suddenly filled the room when Ethan slipped the same ring onto Sophia's hand. Olivia lowered her eyes before anyone could see the tears gathering there. She refused to let them fall. Without speaking another word, she turned away from the moon altar and began walking toward the towering palace doors. No one called after her. No one stopped her. Behind her, music resumed, laughter returned, and congratulations echoed through the hall as though she had already become part of yesterday's memory. Outside, the cold night embraced her with a quiet honesty the ceremony never had. Snowflakes settled across her hair as she stepped onto the empty stone road leading away from the celebration. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she could never walk back. Far beyond the city gates, hidden within the darkness of the winter forest, the distant glow of black lanterns slowly appeared, moving silently toward the capital beneath banners no ordinary alpha pack would ever dare carry. The black lanterns drew closer with silent certainty, their pale flames refusing to flicker despite the icy wind sweeping across the empty road. Olivia Bennett wrapped her thin white cloak tighter around herself as she continued walking through the falling snow, each step carrying her farther from the moon ceremony and every promise that had shattered only minutes before. She did not cry. The pain felt too deep for tears. It settled quietly inside her chest, leaving only a strange emptiness where hope had once lived. Behind her, The distant music from the celebration slowly faded until nothing remained except the soft crunch of snow beneath her boots. The capital streets, usually filled with merchants and travelers, had become nearly deserted as winter deepened into night. Olivia lowered her eyes, trying to ignore the curious glances from the few people who recognized the white ceremonial gown beneath her cloak. News traveled quickly among the packs. By sunrise, everyone would know that an Omega had been abandoned at her own bonding ceremony. She whispered to herself, almost as though speaking the words aloud would help her believe them. It is over. A cold gust swept across the avenue, carrying the scent of pine forests from beyond the city walls. Then something unexpected happened. Bells began ringing from every watchtower surrounding the capital. They were not alarm bells. They were older, slower, and far more ceremonial. Every person still walking the streets immediately stopped. Shopkeepers stepped outside their doors. Travelers removed their hats. Guards stationed along the city walls straightened their posture before lowering themselves onto one knee. Olivia frowned in confusion. She had never seen the capital fall silent so quickly. The sound of approaching horses echoed through the frozen streets, steady and perfectly synchronized. Moments later, a procession of enormous black carriages emerged through the northern gate, each decorated with a silver crest unlike any emblem Olivia had ever seen. Massive wolves carved from polished obsidian adorned the sides of every carriage, their silver eyes reflecting the lantern light with haunting elegance. The horses themselves were larger than ordinary war horses, their glossy black coats almost blending into the winter darkness. Every driver wore the same dark cloak embroidered with silver thread. No one dared speak as the procession advanced through the city. Even the guards kept their heads lowered. Olivia instinctively stepped aside, believing she should avoid blocking the royal procession. The lead carriage rolled past her before unexpectedly slowing. Then it stopped completely. Confused whispers spread among the people lining the street. The heavy carriage door opened without a sound. A tall gentleman wearing formal black attire stepped onto the snowy road. His silver hair reflected the lantern light as he carefully scanned the quiet crowd before his gaze settled directly upon Olivia. He approached with calm, measured steps and bowed respectfully, not as one would greet a noblewoman, but as though greeting someone of extraordinary importance. Olivia instinctively stepped backward. "Sir," she said softly, "I believe you have mistaken me for someone else." The gentleman offered a gentle smile. "Miss Olivia Bennett?" She froze. "Yes." "Then there has been no mistake." Her heartbeat quickened. "How do you know my name?" Instead of answering immediately, the gentleman reached inside his coat and removed an elegant envelope sealed with dark crimson wax bearing the same silver wolf crest displayed upon the royal carriages. He extended it toward her with both hands. "His Majesty has requested that this be placed into your hands personally." Olivia stared at the unfamiliar seal. She had never seen it before, yet something about the ancient emblem felt strangely familiar. With trembling fingers she carefully broke the wax and unfolded the letter. Only one sentence had been written across the thick ivory paper in graceful silver ink. "Miss Olivia Bennett, your family honored the Lycan crown many years ago. Tonight, it is our turn to honor our promise." As Olivia slowly lifted her eyes from the letter, another figure emerged from the carriage. The entire street lowered even farther in silent respect, and for the first time in her life, Olivia found herself standing face to face with the man every kingdom simply called the Lycan King. The moment the Lycan King stepped onto the snow-covered street, the winter air itself seemed to grow still. Olivia Bennett had heard stories about him since she was a little girl. Some claimed he ruled lands beyond the northern mountains where even the oldest alpha packs dared not challenge his authority. Others insisted he rarely left his palace and appeared only when the fate of kingdoms was about to change. None of those stories prepared her for the man now standing only a few feet away. Sebastian Ashford carried himself with effortless confidence, his long black cloak trimmed with silver fur moving gently in the winter wind. His sharp silver eyes rested upon Olivia with calm composure, not pity, not curiosity, simply quiet recognition. Every person lining the street remained kneeling with their heads lowered. No one dared interrupt the silence. Olivia instinctively lowered her own gaze. "Your Majesty," she whispered, unsure whether her trembling voice could even be heard. Sebastian took several unhurried steps toward her before stopping at a respectful distance. "Miss Olivia Bennett," he said evenly. "I regret that our first meeting comes on a difficult evening." Olivia looked up in surprise. His voice carried warmth beneath its quiet authority, nothing like the cold ruler described in countless stories. She held the folded letter carefully in both hands. "Your Majesty, I do not understand. Why would the Lycan crown know my family?" Sebastian glanced briefly toward the snow drifting across the empty avenue before answering. "Because your family once protected mine." Olivia frowned softly. There must be some mistake. The Bennett family has held no influence for many years. Sebastian slowly shook his head. "Influence fades. Honor does not." Those simple words lingered in the cold night between them. The elderly gentleman who had delivered the letter stepped forward and respectfully opened a small polished wooden case. Resting inside was an old silver medallion engraved with the same wolf crest that sealed the letter. Time had softened its edges, but the craftsmanship remained unmistakable. Sebastian carefully lifted the medallion before holding it where Olivia could see it clearly. "Nearly 25 years ago," he said, "your father crossed the northern pass during a blizzard. He discovered my father gravely injured after an avalanche separated him from his royal escort. He did not know he was helping a king. He simply saw another life that needed saving." Olivia listened without speaking. She had been told many stories about her father before he passed away, yet never this one. Sebastian continued quietly. "When my father recovered, he offered wealth, land, and titles. Your father accepted none of them. He asked only one thing." Olivia's heartbeat quickened. What did he ask? Sebastian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He requested that if the Bennett family should ever face its darkest hour, the Lycan crown would remember their kindness. Olivia lowered her eyes. Suddenly, memories returned of her father placing an old silver pendant into her mother's hands during quiet winter evenings, always telling her that promises built upon gratitude should never be forgotten. She had assumed those words were simply another family lesson. Now they carried an entirely different meaning. Sebastian gently closed the wooden case. "For years your family never called upon that promise." He looked directly into Olivia's eyes once more. "Tonight I believe destiny has." Olivia struggled to find the right words. "Your Majesty, I have nothing left to offer the Lycan kingdom." A faint smile touched Sebastian's face. "I did not come seeking what you could offer." He paused before adding, "I came because a promise should be honored before it is too late." Snow continued falling quietly around them. Behind the king, the royal carriage waited with silent dignity beneath the glow of black lanterns. Sebastian extended one gloved hand toward Olivia, not demanding, not commanding, simply inviting. "Come with me," he said. "There is something waiting at the palace that should have belonged to your family long before tonight." Olivia looked at the offered hand, then back toward the distant palace where her former life had ended only an hour earlier. Taking one slow breath, she realized the road behind her had already disappeared beneath fresh snow, while the road ahead had only just begun. Olivia Bennett looked at the hand extended before her for what felt like an eternity. Only an hour earlier, she had watched the future she believed in disappear beneath the bright lights of the moon ceremony. Now, beneath a quiet winter sky, another future waited in complete silence. She slowly placed her hand into Sebastian Ashford's gloved palm. His grip was steady and reassuring, neither possessive nor distant, simply offering support as she stepped toward the waiting royal carriage. The elderly gentleman respectfully opened the carriage door while every guard remained perfectly still. As Olivia climbed inside, she noticed the remarkable simplicity of the royal interior. There were no extravagant decorations, only polished dark wood, warm lanterns, and shelves lined with old leather-bound books. The atmosphere felt peaceful rather than intimidating. Sebastian entered after her, taking the seat across from hers as the carriage began moving through the snow-covered streets with barely a sound. For several moments neither of them spoke. Olivia watched the familiar buildings of the capital slowly disappear beyond the frosted windows. She wondered if anyone inside the Moon Hall had even noticed she was gone. Finally, she gathered enough courage to ask the question that had remained in her thoughts since receiving the mysterious letter. "Your Majesty, if the promise was made so many years ago, Why did you wait until tonight? Sebastian's silver eyes remained fixed on the passing winter landscape before he answered. Because a promise should never interfere with another person's happiness. Olivia looked at him quietly. He continued. I knew of your engagement. I believed you had found the life you wished to build. The Lycan crown had no intention of disturbing that future. A faint smile filled with quiet sadness crossed Olivia's face. Until tonight. Sebastian gave a single nod. Until tonight. The carriage continued northward beyond the city gates. Snow-covered forests stretched endlessly beneath the moonlight, their towering pines casting long shadows across the frozen road. Olivia felt strangely calm despite everything that had happened. For the first time that evening, no one expected her to prove her worth or defend who she was. Sebastian reached into a small wooden compartment beside his seat and removed another carefully preserved document. He handed it to Olivia. The aged parchment carried the royal seal of the Lycan kingdom beside the faded signature of her father. As she unfolded it, she recognized her father's handwriting immediately. Tears gathered in her eyes, not from grief alone but from hearing his familiar voice through the words he had written decades earlier. The final sentence caught her breath completely. If my family should ever stand alone, I ask only that they be treated with the same kindness they once offered yours. Olivia carefully closed the letter, holding it close against her heart. He never told me. Sebastian answered gently. Some people perform their greatest acts without ever speaking about them. The carriage eventually climbed the winding mountain road leading toward the Lycan palace. As the forest opened, Olivia caught her first glimpse of the ancient fortress rising above the cliffs. Its dark stone tower stood proudly beneath the stars, their windows glowing with warm golden light instead of the cold grandeur she had imagined from old stories. Long banners embroidered with silver wolves moved gracefully in the winter breeze while hundreds of lanterns illuminated the broad staircase leading to the entrance. Before the carriage fully stopped, the enormous palace doors slowly opened from within. 2 rows of royal attendants dressed in elegant black and silver attire stepped outside and quietly bowed their heads. None of them looked surprised by Olivia's arrival. It was as though they had been expecting her all along. Sebastian stepped from the carriage first before turning toward her once again. There is one more promise my family must fulfill tonight, he said. Olivia accepted his offered hand and descended onto the snow-covered stone courtyard. As she lifted her eyes toward the palace entrance, she saw an elderly high chancellor, waiting beside a beautifully decorated ceremonial table. Resting upon dark velvet at its center were 2 ancient silver rings, untouched by time, as though they had been waiting for this very night across an entire generation. Olivia Bennett stood before the ancient ceremonial table while snow drifted gently through the open palace courtyard, each white flake catching the golden light of hundreds of lanterns suspended from carved stone arches. The silence surrounding the gathering felt sacred rather than heavy. Every royal attendant remained respectfully still, their heads slightly lowered as though witnessing a tradition far older than any kingdom now standing. Olivia's eyes settled upon the 2 silver rings resting on the dark velvet cushion. Unlike the elegant jewelry displayed during the moon ceremony earlier that evening, these rings carried no glittering gemstones. Their beauty came from intricate carvings of intertwined wolves encircling the bands, symbols polished smooth by generations of careful preservation. The elderly High Chancellor stepped forward with measured grace. His voice, though softened by age, carried clearly across the courtyard. For nearly 25 years these rings have remained untouched inside the Royal Hall of Promises. Olivia looked toward Sebastian Ashford, who stood quietly beside her in his black ceremonial cloak. There was no pressure in his expression, only patience. The Chancellor continued. King Alexander Ashford entrusted his son with one final duty before his passing. Should the Bennett family ever call upon the promise forged through honor, the Lycan crown would answer without hesitation. Olivia lowered her eyes as memories of her father's gentle smile filled her thoughts once more. She suddenly understood why he had always spoken of kindness as an investment that expected nothing in return. Sebastian slowly turned toward her. "Olivia," he said softly, speaking her name without titles or ceremony, "you owe me nothing. If you wish to leave tonight, my carriage will return you wherever you choose to go. The promise made to your father has already been fulfilled by bringing you safely here." His words surprised everyone. attendant standing nearby. The High Chancellor himself glanced toward the king before lowering his gaze again. Olivia searched Sebastian's face. There was no hidden expectation behind his offer. For the first time that entire evening, someone had given her a choice without asking her to prove her value first. She took a slow breath. "May I ask one question?" Sebastian nodded. "Of course. If I accept, why would you marry someone you only met tonight?" A faint smile touched his face, quiet and sincere. "Because my father taught me that the strongest kingdoms are built upon character before bloodlines." He paused before adding gently, "Everything I have learned about Olivia Bennett speaks of compassion, loyalty, and courage. Those qualities cannot be inherited. They are chosen every day." Olivia felt the tightness around her heart slowly begin to loosen. She looked once more toward the ancient rings before raising her eyes to meet Sebastian's steady gaze. "Then my answer is yes." The words barely rose above a whisper, yet every person present heard them clearly. A warm breeze unexpectedly swept through the courtyard, stirring the silver banners hanging above the palace entrance. The High Chancellor smiled with quiet satisfaction before carefully lifting the first ring and presenting it to Sebastian. "By the ancient covenant of the Lycan crown," he declared, "may promises honored become blessings renewed." Sebastian gently placed the silver ring upon Olivia's finger. It fit perfectly, as though crafted for her long before this night had ever arrived. When Olivia accepted the second ring and placed it upon Sebastian's hand, the engraved wolf symbols shimmered softly beneath the lantern light. No dazzling magic filled the sky. No thunder echoed through the mountains. Only a profound stillness settled over everyone present, carrying the unmistakable feeling that something deeply meaningful had just been restored. The assembled attendants bowed together. "Long live the king," they said in unison before lifting their heads once more. Then, with unmistakable warmth in their voices, they added words Olivia never imagined she would hear spoken to her. "Long live the Queen." Olivia stood speechless as the title echoed gently through the palace courtyard. Sebastian looked toward her with the same calm smile she had begun to trust. "Welcome home," he said quietly. Far beyond the northern mountains, while the first light of dawn slowly approached the horizon, messengers carrying the silver wolf crest departed the Lycan palace in every direction, ensuring that before another sunrise had fully arrived, every alpha pack in the kingdom would awaken to news that would leave the entire realm in stunned silence. The first rays of dawn stretched across the snow-covered mountains as silver banners bearing the crest of the Lycan crown fluttered above every road leading from the palace. One after another, royal messengers rode through the neighboring kingdoms carrying sealed announcements that would reach every alpha pack before the morning sun climbed above the horizon. Inside the Grand Council chamber of the Western Alliance, Alpha Ethan Walker stood beside Sophia Lancaster welcoming visiting elders after what he believed had been the most successful night of his life. Guests congratulated him on securing an alliance with one of the oldest pureblood families, and he accepted every compliment with quiet satisfaction. Sophia smiled confidently, convinced their future had never looked brighter. Then the massive oak doors of the council hall opened. A royal herald dressed in black and silver entered carrying a scroll sealed with dark crimson wax. Every conversation immediately stopped. Even the oldest pack leaders recognized the unmistakable crest of the Lycan kingdom. The herald walked calmly to the center of the chamber before breaking the royal seal. His voice echoed clearly beneath the vaulted ceiling. "By decree of His Majesty Sebastian Ashford, Lycan King of the Northern Realm, let it be known that during the sacred hours of last night, the ancient covenant between the House of Ashford and the House of Bennett was fulfilled. Olivia Bennett has lawfully entered the Lycan royal family, and shall henceforth be recognized throughout every allied kingdom as Her Majesty, Queen Olivia Ashford." Silence swept across the chamber so completely that the crackling fireplace became the only sound anyone could hear. Ethan's smile slowly disappeared. Sophia blinked in disbelief before looking toward him, waiting for him to laugh and dismiss the announcement as impossible. He could not. His eyes remained fixed upon the royal seal. No one in the known kingdoms would dare forge the authority of the Lycan crown. Quiet whispers spread through the assembled nobles. "The Bennett daughter," one elder murmured. "The Omega from last night?" Another slowly shook his head in amazement. "She is the Lycan Queen now." Ethan lowered his gaze, remembering the exact moment Olivia had walked away from the moon altar without looking back. For the first time since making his decision, uncertainty settled heavily inside him. He had believed he was choosing the stronger future. Instead, destiny had quietly written another ending. Several days later, leaders from every major pack gathered for the annual Winter Alliance assembly inside the Grand Capitol Hall. Ethan and Sophia arrived early, expecting to stand among the honored guests. Instead, they noticed something unusual. Every royal banner displayed alongside the Alpha Pack crests now included the silver wolf emblem of the Lycan Kingdom placed above them all. Moments later, the Master of Ceremonies struck the marble floor once with his staff. Their Majesties have arrived. Every Alpha, Elder, Noble and Ambassador rose to their feet simultaneously. The enormous doors opened, revealing Sebastian Ashford walking with calm confidence beside Olivia. She wore an elegant ivory winter gown beneath a graceful white royal cloak fastened by the silver wolf crest that now rested over her heart. She carried herself with the same quiet kindness she had always possessed, but now every person in the chamber greeted her with unmistakable respect. As Olivia and Sebastian passed through the hall, every guest bowed their head. Ethan remained frozen where he stood, watching the woman he had once believed was not enough receive honors greater than he had ever imagined. Olivia briefly noticed him among the crowd. Their eyes met for only a heartbeat. There was no anger in hers, no triumph, only peaceful acceptance before she continued walking forward beside her husband. Sebastian gently offered his arm, and Olivia accepted it with a warm smile as they approached the royal platform together. The applause that filled the hall this time was not for power alone. It was for integrity, loyalty, and promises kept across generations. In that quiet moment, the entire kingdom witnessed a truth that would be remembered long after crowns had changed hands. Bloodlines may open doors, but character determines who is worthy to walk through them. And the woman once left standing alone beneath the moon altar had become a queen because kindness endured where pride had failed. Days passed, yet the atmosphere inside the Lycan Palace never felt unfamiliar to Olivia Ashford. Every corridor carried the quiet dignity of history, rather than the weight of expectation. Servants greeted her with sincere respect, never because they feared her title, but because the king himself treated her with unwavering courtesy. That example quietly shaped the entire palace. Each morning, Olivia walked through the palace gardens where evergreen pines stood proudly beneath blankets of fresh snow and frozen fountains reflected the pale winter sun like polished crystal. She often stopped to speak with gardeners, cooks, stable hands, and young attendants, learning their names instead of allowing them to remain invisible faces within the palace. Before long, conversations about the new queen spread throughout the kingdom. People whispered that she thanked every servant personally, remembered birthdays, and visited the royal kitchen simply to compliment the bread that had been baked before sunrise. Those small gestures traveled farther than any royal decree ever could. Sebastian watched these quiet moments from a respectful distance. He never interrupted her kindness, never attempted to reshape her into someone more regal. One afternoon, as they overlooked the valley from the palace terrace, he finally spoke. "You have changed this palace more in 1 week than many rulers accomplish in years." Olivia smiled softly while watching snowflakes drift across the mountains. "I have not changed anything." Sebastian leaned against the stone railing beside her. The servants laugh more. The guards stand taller. Even the council meetings have become less hostile. Olivia looked at him with gentle curiosity. "How can kindness accomplish all of that?" Sebastian answered without hesitation. "Because people become their best selves when they know they are seen." His words remained with her long after the conversation ended. Later that evening, the Royal Council assembled to discuss requests submitted by neighboring packs seeking assistance after an unusually severe winter had damaged crops and trade routes. Several advisors recommended limiting aid in order to protect the kingdom's resources. Olivia quietly listened until Sebastian turned toward her. "What do you think?" The council members also shifted their attention to the new queen, curious whether compassion alone could answer difficult decisions. Olivia studied the map spread across the polished oak table before speaking. "If we keep everything for ourselves, we may survive this winter comfortably." She paused, tracing the mountain roads connecting the neighboring territories. "But if our neighbors struggle while we prosper alone, next winter everyone becomes weaker." The room fell silent. She continued calmly. Strength shared creates stability. Stability creates peace. Peace protects every kingdom. Several seasoned advisors slowly nodded. Sebastian looked at the council with quiet confidence. Prepare the relief caravans. No one objected. Over the following days, wagons loaded with grain, medicine, warm blankets, and building supplies departed the Lycan kingdom beneath silver banners. The aid reached villages that had expected nothing more than polite sympathy. Instead, they found generosity without demands or hidden agreements. Stories about Queen Olivia spread far beyond the northern mountains. Children repeated them around fireplaces. Merchants carried them from town to town. Even distant rulers began speaking of the queen whose greatest strength seemed to be her ability to make every person feel valued. One snowy afternoon, an elderly woman visiting the palace to thank the royal family gently held Olivia's hands and smiled through grateful tears. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "people remember crowns for a generation. They remember kindness forever." Olivia looked toward Sebastian standing nearby. He answered the woman's words with a quiet smile before meeting Olivia's eyes. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. In that peaceful silence, both understood that the promise made decades earlier between two honorable fathers had grown into something neither kingdom had expected. It had become the foundation of a future where compassion stood beside strength, proving that the greatest rulers were never measured only by the power they possessed, but by the hope they inspired in everyone who walked beside them. Spring arrived gradually across the northern kingdom, replacing endless blankets of snow with emerald valleys and rivers that shimmered beneath warm morning sunlight. Under Queen Olivia Ashford's guidance, the annual Festival of Unity became the largest gathering the Lycan Kingdom had hosted in generations. Delegations from dozens of alpha packs, merchant guilds, and neighboring territories traveled north to celebrate new trade agreements and stronger alliances built upon trust rather than rivalry. Colorful banners lined the palace courtyard while musicians filled the air with lively melodies and children laughed as they chased one another through gardens bursting with early blossoms. Olivia moved comfortably among the guests, greeting elders with respect, kneeling to speak with children at eye level, and thanking every visiting delegation for making the long journey. People who had expected a distant queen instead discovered someone who listened carefully before speaking. Throughout the day, countless visitors quietly admitted that the stories about her kindness had not been exaggerated. Meanwhile, Sebastian Ashford observed the gathering with quiet satisfaction. His advisors often reminded him that strength secured borders, yet as he watched strangers become friends beneath the palace banners, he understood once again that compassion secured something even greater. Near the center of the festival grounds stood a newly unveiled monument honoring the covenant between the Bennett family and the Lycan crown. Rather than depicting kings or battles, the sculpture showed two ordinary hands reaching toward one another, symbolizing that true loyalty begins with simple acts of courage. Visitors paused before it throughout the afternoon, reading the inscription carved into polished stone. Honor remembered becomes hope renewed. Among the arriving guests were Alpha Ethan Walker and Sophia Lancaster, representing their pack with quiet formality. Their presence attracted respectful greetings, yet it was clear the attention of the crowd belonged elsewhere. As Ethan watched Olivia warmly welcome every visitor without a trace of bitterness toward anyone from her past, he felt the weight of choices that could never be undone. Sophia stood beside him in thoughtful silence. Even she recognized that no title earned through status alone could command the genuine admiration surrounding the Lycan Queen. Later that afternoon, Sebastian invited leaders from every attending kingdom into the Great Hall for the signing of a new charter promising mutual aid during times of hardship. Before the ceremony began, he unexpectedly asked Olivia to address the assembly first. Hundreds of distinguished guests turned toward her as she stepped forward. She paused briefly, remembering the frightened young woman who had once stood alone after losing everything she thought defined her future. Then she smiled gently. Many people believe that destiny is decided by birth, status, or bloodlines, she began. My life has taught me something different. Destiny is shaped by the choices we make after disappointment finds us. Every act of kindness plants a seed whose harvest we may never live to see, yet someone else will. The hall remained perfectly still as every listener absorbed her words. Olivia continued. My father chose compassion without expecting a reward. Years later, that single decision changed my entire life. Imagine what could happen if every kingdom chose to lead with the same spirit." When she finished speaking, the silence lasted only a heartbeat before the entire hall rose in a standing ovation. The applause echoed beneath the towering ceilings, not because of royal obligation, but because every person present recognized sincerity when they heard it. Sebastian approached her with unmistakable pride shining in his silver eyes. Without speaking, he offered his hand. Olivia accepted it with a grateful smile, and together they turned toward the assembled leaders as the new charter was signed beneath the silver wolf banner. Beyond the palace windows, sunlight poured across the mountains while bells rang joyfully throughout the valley, carrying a message that reached far beyond the Lycan kingdom itself. The greatest legacy a ruler could leave behind was never fear or conquest, but the courage to transform even the deepest personal heartbreak into a future where countless others could find hope. Years later, travelers entering the Northern Kingdom often asked the same question before they admired the towering palace or the silver banners dancing above its walls. They asked why the people smiled so easily when speaking about their rulers. The answer never came from historians or royal advisors. It came from ordinary citizens whose lives had quietly changed because one promise had been remembered instead of forgotten. Queen Olivia Ashford never allowed the memory of her own difficult night to become a source of bitterness. Instead, it became the reason she welcomed every lonely visitor with understanding, every struggling family with compassion, and every hopeful child with encouragement. She often visited the monument honoring her father and King Alexander, placing fresh white roses beside the carved stone hands that symbolized the covenant between two honorable families. Standing there one peaceful afternoon, she reflected on how close she had come to believing her story had ended beneath the lights of the moon ceremony. Had she surrendered to despair that night, she would never have discovered that destiny sometimes waits just beyond the moment everything appears lost. Sebastian Ashford quietly joined her, carrying 2 cups of warm tea as he often did during their evening walks. He handed one to Olivia before looking toward the mountains glowing beneath the golden sunset. "The valley is changing again," he observed. Olivia smiled as children laughed in the distance, while chasing one another through fields of wildflowers that had replaced the winter snow. "So are the people." Sebastian nodded. "Because they finally believe kindness can be stronger than pride." They continued walking through the palace gardens, no longer needing grand speeches to understand one another. Their partnership had never been built upon perfect beginnings. It had grown from mutual respect, patient trust, and promises honored without expectation. Across the kingdom, Queen Olivia's charitable schools, healing centers, and community houses flourished, each one established with the same philosophy her father had lived by. Give generously when no reward is expected, because the greatest rewards often arrive in ways no one can predict. In another part of the realm, Ethan Walker continued serving his pack with greater humility than before. Time had softened regret into wisdom. He no longer measured people by status or ancestry, teaching younger alphas that leadership required character before ambition. Sophia Lancaster also dedicated herself to charitable work within her own territory, understanding that true respect could never be inherited. Although their paths rarely crossed again, the lessons born from one unforgettable evening quietly transformed every life connected to it. On the anniversary of the covenant each year, representatives from every allied kingdom gathered beneath the silver wolf banner. Together they renewed a simple pledge to protect one another during seasons of hardship, remembering that peace endured longest when built upon gratitude rather than fear. As twilight settled across the palace one final evening, Olivia and Sebastian stood upon the same terrace where they had once watched winter storms sweep across the mountains. The landscape before them had changed with every passing season, yet one truth remained constant. The strongest bond between two people was never created by titles, bloodlines, or public ceremonies. It was created when two hearts chose honor over pride and hope over disappointment. Olivia gently rested her hand within Sebastian's as the palace bells echoed across the peaceful valley below. The sound carried beyond forests, rivers, villages, and distant kingdoms, reminding everyone who heard it that a single act of kindness could outlive generations. The young woman who once walked alone into a cold winter night had not been abandoned by destiny after all. She had simply been guided toward the place where she truly belonged. And in the quiet glow of the setting sun, surrounded by a kingdom united through compassion, Queen Olivia understood that the greatest love stories are not written by perfect beginnings, but by the courage to keep walking until destiny finally reveals the home that has been waiting all along.